Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Kling, the CEO and founder of FYX Gaming, and I'm here remotely from North Carolina in the U.S. So it's very, very early in the morning, and almost lunchtime for you guys. So I'll go ahead and get started. So just a little bit about me and kind of my background and why I'm here. I've been pretty much ever since I can remember, I think 17, wanting to get into business and figure something out. Like I started, I think my first business was kind of an online publication in the late 90s on the internet, and then moved into like web hosting businesses. And actually around high school, I used to be a computer programmer. So always kind of had that technical. I ended up falling out of programming and kind of moving more into marketing, and did various performance marketing businesses, and then started moving into, essentially more like software products with like SaaS, or, a lot of those things you see online that you can sign up to or subscribe to. I got really heavily into that. But around 2013, I actually remember we had a local Bitcoin meetup, and I remember seeing a headline. I think it was like $1 billion market cap for Bitcoin, and I was like, "Oh, what's going on here?" And started checking into that more and more, and really just started following it for a while. I didn't really know what to do with it at that time. Back then, we were talking about this kind of new technology that was really exciting, but there was we didn't have exchanges yet. I mean, you couldn't even really obtain it. And so, that was something I didn't really want to get into, operating exchange with money laundering issues or money transfer licenses and all that. And so I basically just kind of watched it and was doing, other things. But wasn't until probably 2017 I started looking at Ethereum a lot more. And I think a lot of the concepts of smart contracts started to really make sense to me at that time. And there was a project called CryptoKitties back then that made the headlines, that kind of really opened my eyes to what I think was the kind of the birth of blockchain gaming. That kind of really niche experimental industry started around probably beginning of 2018, I would say, maybe a little bit, before that. And we had all these kind of different projects, and I came up with the idea. I was like, hey, let's push the limits here. Nobody was really using a 3D game engine. They were primarily all web-based kind of games. They weren't even really much of a game back then. And came up with the concept Cryptofights, and started getting some professional game developers. He was Abel Dantas was my first hire, and then David Case shortly came on, and we were basically trying to figure out how to make this thing work on Ethereum. So kind of back in that time period, there was this kind of big promise of what blockchain gaming could be. It was this really exciting vision for what this could turn into. And back then, I mean, we're talking about, especially if I'm talking to a lot of game developers here, that the daily active users were a couple of hundred. All right, I'll let that sink in. I mean, there wasn't a huge market here. It was really this new thing that these kind of early adopters were playing around with. And what I saw though is that there's a lot of kind of community around these projects. So that project CryptoKitties that I mentioned had just incredible community developing around. So let me explain this game. If you've never heard of this game, it was really a kind of a breeding card game, where you would take a cat and it would have specific DNA traits, and then you would breed with another cat that would produce offspring that had some modifications to it. And then sometimes you could get like these rare kitties, and then you could then go and sell those into the marketplace. It was really just like a collectible trading game kind of thing. I didn't really get into it, obviously, but there was people that did. And actually the headline I remember is one of those kitties sold for over $100,000. And I was like, what is going on here? But anyways, the community around that was very passionate about the project, and I think it's actually, I haven't looked at it in a while, but I think it's still going. Dapper Labs, the company behind that game, ended up doing more and more things, and it's become like a billion, over I think several $1 billion company now, with NBA Top Shot and whatnot. But that was kind of their first kind of rise to fame, was this experiment back in 2017, 2018. The innovative tech, I think, drew a lot of people in, especially in the crypto industry, about how applying kind of this payment system, right? Again, when you kind of, if you've been back in this industry for a long time, it was mostly the narrative was mostly around payments, right? Is that we're going to make payments over the internet in kind of this new way that's frictionless. It can help the unbanked and it can go global and on and on and on. And now when we started to enter in this kind of game, right, we're thinking, well, how is blockchain, how is a payment system going to change around games? You know, we have plenty of really tried and tested solutions for getting money into games, right? And you know, what is this kind of new technology going to change with a game? And so it was very very new tech, but I think that's part of the industry that really needed to evolve, and why I got in is the just the ability for how this technology is going to actually change gaming. And I'll go into kind of how I think we're doing that in a later slide. The other big deal back then on the promise of blockchain gaming was that you could actually have true ownership of your assets. That's probably the thing that really, I think, really came through right away and was most apparent, is that we had these concepts of NFTs, right? I think everyone's probably heard about an NFT at that point. A couple years ago, no one really had, right? So they've really, in the last couple years, come really prime time. Well, back in 2018, it was very, very niche. And, you know, people had the ability to kind of think about all the games they've played and all of the we call them assets, but just game items that we've had to buy or, you know, equip, or through loot boxes or whatever mechanism it was, that they were essentially stuck in that system or that silo. And this technology really gave the ability for it to break out and become outside of that silo, outside of that game developer or that publisher or whatever. So that was really exciting, that this whole kind of the economics of a game can really be extended outside of the game. And yes, you know, people can reclaim some of the value they put in, people can profit, and that was just really exciting, and it still is. And then the last thing was this decentralized system. This was, to me, one of the big things that really got me interested is having a concept of a kind of an organism that exists outside. It's almost like cloud hosting, but the cloud is like this decentralized federated system that can never be taken down, will operate perpetually, and you know, people can modify and mod it and all this. And I was like, amazing, because then you have almost like this open source gaming network that could turn into what I think we now talk about, the metaverse, right? So that was really very very interesting. And again, this is the kind of the feeling back in 2018, right? And so now fast forward to today, and really actually the last couple of years, the reality of blockchain gaming started to sink in. One is that any successful project, for example, Cryptokitties I mentioned, almost completely broke, or maybe you could argue that it did broke the Ethereum network because of the throughput that it was doing. It was doing so many transactions that actually the Ethereum network got so congested that everything else could not essentially process, and gas fees shot up and whatnot. So you can't really operate a business that way. It's almost like the credit card payment rail system, you know, had kind of rush hour. You just didn't want to drive at that time, so didn't really make sense. And we had better solutions already. So the the technology, the kind of the layer one or the core of the network was not really ready for any kind of really successful project, right? And so they started experimenting with layer two solutions and other kind of techniques to be able to basically either do less on chain or put it more activity into this kind of other blockchain, that they do the kind of the high activity and then report the conclusion of that activity to the main blockchain. And so they had this kind of conundrum, and I'm gonna maybe go into an example about Axie Infinity and what I think happened with them, but the scalability was a big issue. The other ones is that I mentioned a lot of these games really weren't games; they were really kind of, I would say, they're experiments, they're tests. Axie Infinity actually started in 2018. I believe Splinterlands was around that time, and they were web-based games, which is good for a distribution system, right? You didn't have to worry about app stores or what device your user was on. But they didn't really push the limit into what I, as a lifelong gamer, really expect. I think to get immersed is a really rich entertainment experience. So they didn't have a whole lot of gameplay, and actually once the, I guess, the inflection point with NFTs and that people could make easy money, then there's tons and tons of games that, and that's again games air quote, that came in to try to capitalize on kind of the frothiness of the market and make easy money. And that's still going on now. I'm a little bit of a biased opinion that, since I've kind of been in this a little over 4 years now, that a lot of the games that are coming in are becoming prettier and prettier to look at, but a lot of the technology that underpins the game is really not innovative. They're really just kind of cashing in on the NFT craze right now. And part of those things with the NFTs is that they don't really have the ability to store data on chain. They are essentially serial numbers that you kind of own really within that game, and the game essentially kind of recognize what that serial number means in that game. So there's a lot of what the public thinks an NFT is to the actual technology doesn't really match up to it. And I mentioned with the Ethereum and a lot of these other chains, do have a transaction cost issue. Some don't, but have other issues to boot with that. And actually Vitalik, the creator of Ethereum, actually said the blockchain trilemma, right? And that's scalability, decentralization, and security, and pick two, right? But you can't have all three, or that's really the problem that we need to solve. And so most of these chains have one of those missing, at least some two, in my opinion. And that creates an issue for gaming, where if you have millions and millions of players, it just won't work. You will basically hit a brick wall, and you just can't operate at that point. And also, I think we're kind of in a transition period to the next phase of this, but right now we have limited NFT utility. There not much you can do with NFTs right now other than go and sell them. And we can maybe in the Q&A we can get more into that. So with our game, if anyone wants to check it out, it's cryptofights.com. We are currently down right now, and I'm going to kind of tell you why. We launched initially publicly in the summer of last year with a infrastructure to be able to support a real-time turn-based game. And we're not even talking about first-person shooters or any really high activity game like that. And we needed a way for these real-time decisions in a game to work with blockchain. So in other words, the player had essentially a Bitcoin wallet that they're operating as essentially their input or their joystick or their controller. And we had to figure out a way to do this. It was never been done this way. And we launched, and we got enough players to generate, it was about 550,000 transactions that day. And we were like, wow, this is successful, right? We had, I think, one YouTube influencer that mentioned us, and we just got so many users, and we started to break. It's, started to lag, and we were like, okay, we need to rethink this. Now, this wasn't a blockchain problem. This was the good problem of scaling internally, our own internal processes. How do we actually manage the data that's coming in, right? And so we came back down, and then we kind of retooled again, and we had a lot of fire under our butts to to get back up to kind of keep these players engaged. And we came back up, and then we started doing several million a day, and we're like, it's just not stopping. So we had a very, very good problem here. Now you understand kind of about the scaling is that if things aren't working and people are wanting to watch or play your game, there's a big problem that you got to fix. So kind of back to what I was saying with scaling is that we when we first launched, we had a little over 500,000 transactions, and we had to retool. We came back up, and then we had a couple of million transactions. And just for perspective, Ethereum can't push over maybe 1.3 million a day if you're lucky. Bitcoin less than a million. Bitcoin Core to be specific. And then you have some of these other blockchains that have, like I said, on that blockchain trilemma, sacrificed security or scalability, or just one of those things that can actually do more transactions but sacrificed something. And that typically is the proof of stake blockchains that Solana, there's some other ones that maybe can claim that they can do that many but actually don't or can't because they don't have the application that can push a lot of that. And that goes to a lot of how a lot of these things are designed. And so the last iteration that we did, we were doing just over about 10.5 million transactions a day. And then we were like, okay, like we really got to get serious about here to doing the hundreds of millions of transactions. Now, theoretically, that type of volume where we're 100 million plus a day on a blockchain with data also is going to be the biggest blockchain in the world. It's the biggest blockchain IO system in the world. And we start to, I think, unlock and change the narrative about what is possible with not only blockchain gaming, but with just applications in general. So really the key theme here, and I mentioned, and I'm getting low on time, I think, with all the hiccups here, but the game Axie Infinity traded security to scale. They were one of the first successful play and earn, play to earn games that was able to achieve millions of daily active users. And they had to basically migrate from Ethereum to something. And they ended up choosing kind of their own blockchain, Ronin. And with Ronin, it's kind of like a proof of stake type of setup where they had validators, or essentially think of them as agents that had to authorize transactions, and they created a bridge from one to another, and it basically the complexity went up. And because of that new complexity, they got hacked, and I'm hoping everyone heard about that. But it was over $600 million worth were hacked from their system, and they are on kind of a downward ascent. They peaked at around 3 million DAUs, and they're under 1 million now. They have a really hard time to kind of climb back with their community, which I mentioned was key in the earlier slides. So with Cryptofights and FYX Gaming and the infrastructure that we're pioneering, we have to be very mindful that, even if we have kind of the impetus to really try to go fast, and, we're a startup and we have to make big moves and be relevant in the market. But at the same time, if we are successful, we have a big risk of running into one of these issues, and we got to make sure that the infrastructure can scale. I'm happy to take Q&A on that. It's a very interesting topic. And what are we kind of doing differently is that we're actually putting gameplay on chain, whereas most other games really just kind of recognize that you own an NFT, and then you can kind of play with it in the game, and then you maybe sell it in the marketplace. But that's really it. It's not really a high IO type of activity, in my opinion. So we're actually doing, gameplay, like your move can be a transaction. You obviously NFTs can be a transaction. I mean, really the sky's the limit. We want to make it to where the imagination of the developer, whether it's a game or an application, can really do anything, because we've proven that it can scale. There's no risk that if you really do knock it out of the park and you're successful app or game or whatever it is, that you don't have to worry about it just hitting a brick wall like a lot of these other projects. I mean, this is the almost like the $1 trillion question here, is that if a Fortnite or a Call of Duty did something like this, I'd be really worried if I was them. And even on these kind of private blockchains or layer 2 solutions won't scale, and a lot of people don't realize that. So we're really coming from this in a different way than most of the market. And so one of the things that I want to kind of, as an example of the capability that this unlocks by putting gameplay on chain, is obviously with esports, it unlocks a heck of a lot for game integrity. Is now you have, for ranked modes or any kind of high value gameplay, you actually have a data trail, an immutable chain of custody data trail that has happened with the player if it's integrated into the game correctly, right? So let's say it's in the game client, or it's a companion app, to where all of the moves, and maybe they even wrap it with a know your customer, so they know the true identity of that ranked player, or let's say it's a team. They have every single move that they've ever done for a game, and what that means, it's like a permanent cloud save of everything they've ever done. And so they can actually, for example, like Dota 2, if I'm remembering right, has a save game file for your past games that you can play back in a spectator mode and see it just like it was live. And so we can actually do that with games now. And I mean, imagine that, right? Every single game, like a MOBA, like League of Legends, or even a first-person shooter, you had literally every game move down to the granular detail stored for you to replay back later. Not a hash of it, but the actual gameplay. And it unlocks you to be able to render it back through the game engine to create that spectator mode, to where people can comment on it and go back 5 years ago to see the start of this new team, on and on and on and on. It's better than Twitch, in my opinion. So we have incredible opportunity with that, and we've actually created some of that as proof of concepts. But you also have the ability to have one game's data be meaningful in another game. And so an example I kind of put here, I was just thinking of some silly ideas that, like maybe in Cryptofights, they have to play 100 battles, and then that unlocks some other like Fight Club game from the movie, right? That you can only get into the club if you can kind of achieve membership, right? And that game could go and look at that same data on the blockchain to basically create a different experience in the game. I mean, obviously, people have probably thought about like weather, reflecting real world weather in a game, but you can actually have basically games have a shared source of truth, and I think that on the creativity side unlocks a whole new dimension of gaming that we've never really had. Same thing with like NFTs, that NFTs can affect the game and maybe where they're used and so on. So it's to me that's a whole new world, and that's a lot of where Fix is going, and where we want to innovate a lot. And so kind of just to wrap up about how can blockchain transform the gaming industry is that these new experiences I think are the big deal. A lot of the metaverse talk is really centered around this. Esports, my head was around this a long time ago, that it radically changes esports when these competitive matches and for online tournaments with cash prizes, and obviously the player owned assets, owning NFTs, but also being able to actually transform those NFTs into different things. So a wood sword becomes a metal sword, to a diamond flaming sword, or whatever it is. That can be the game can facilitate that, or maybe a conglomeration of games can do that as well. And so we put out Cryptofights 1 as basically like a proof of concept. We had to figure out the infrastructure of how all of this is going to work. And we got so many users that we had to kind of really pioneer the infrastructure, and we're still making sure that we can scale. But late last year I realized that we really need to really push the limit on this more and make this a better game to compete with A, what's out there now, and B, what's coming down the pipeline with the eye candy, right? And so we've radically transformed what Cryptofights is, in terms of what you can do with the item economy and just the items meta. The graphics, we have new kind of NPCs, and we're doing motion capture and all that. So we're really trying to push the limit of what we can do, especially with our community. And we're creating special NFT skins that are going to be very exclusive to our players and all that. And so I can't really get into a lot of this right now. I urge you to go. I'm going to put this. It's whitepaper.cryptofights.io. You can also go to cryptofights.com just to look at our white paper and see what's coming. And we have in our community a lot of teasers about this. And I'm going to give you a quick glimpse with a little bit of time I have left. Our item crafting is now dramatically expanded from essentially ingredients. You need recipes, and then you have to take them to a blacksmith or an enchanter, which I'll go to in a second, to actually modify the items. And so if you haven't played our game kind of consists around how you set up your player. Essentially, it's like an RPG. You have stats in your player, as well as the items, so the armor, or the weapons that you have equipped. And each of those weapons have different properties, like different damage types, and the dice rolls were kind of based on D&D mechanics. And we're basically making a whole new dimension of how items kind of work in the game, with creating sockets, making them more powerful with like +1s, and then going to, for example, in the enchanter, where you can actually create these magical spheres that have either burst damage over time, fire, poison, cold damage, lightning damage, and on and on, to create kind of this whole new way to kind of fight your opponent in the game. We also have a new concept with portal fragments. This is essentially kind of maybe more of the end game for a player, is that once they kind of have the most valuable ingredients, they can kind of create these portal fragments that they can then stake inside of a portal. And they essentially get, we're going to create a new token for the game, but they'll get passively all of the tokens, similar to kind of Haste Arcade, where they have to pay to go and play PvP to enter that. And when they stake, they're going to be getting some of those kind of passive rewards from the revenue that arena takes in. So this is kind of another thing, and a lot of this is, again, I hope in QA I can kind of address this, is with a kind of a tokenized game that is very important for certain player classes. We also have the leaderboards that are going to be part of the new game too. With we're going to have a kind of an all-time leaderboard called God's Leaderboard, as well as a daily leaderboard. And if you place in PvP in a certain level, you actually get passive token rewards that you can then use in the marketplace to buy more items, to send to your friends. I mean, there's going to be so many things I can do. I can't get into it. But that's why the leaderboard is very important, because it's the incentive for them to play PvP and to go into the dungeons to farm for certain items and ingredients that they'll need. Quick thing with a little bit of time I have about kind of NFTs now is that we are really in the not. I hope it's either this year or next year that we're going to start transitioning out to utility for NFTs. And this is a Bored Ape Yacht Club picture. Recently, I looked at it; it was listed for $150,000 in Ethereum, and it's essentially it's like collectible art, but there's so many of this now, and I think it's kind of a bubble that it has to move into utility. I think the big crypto wipeout is kind of showing like what has actual demand versus kind of bubble economics with kind of easy money in the market. So I think that's coming to where they're gonna the projects that have more utility or you can do things with NFTs are probably going to become more valuable by default rather than the speculation here. I mentioned the bottom three earlier that most of these NFTs are just serial numbers, and the actual art or asset is actually stored on the cloud or maybe with something like IPFS, which is still has to be online for it to work. And this is a little bit about where we're going here. We have a concept here that we're working on, basically that are smart objects, and what this means is that think of if you can think of an NFT. Let's use an arena that's an NFT. So let's say it's a combat arena that is tokenized, and that arena can actually have code that lives on chain. And one game wants to utilize that arena, and so let's say there's a million of those NFTs floating around, and people have to have it to play in that arena. Well, that arena could actually be smart in the sense that royalties can be paid out for usage. You could also have that arena used or utilized by many different games or applications simultaneously. And you also can make it kind of transform. So let's say the arena changes by its utilization. So on the right here, I kind of have an example of a seed as an NFT that actually has pre-written code that says if I receive water and if I receive oxygen, which maybe could be other NFTs or fungible tokens, that I transform into a sapling. And then as I get more ingredients or more things happen in this micro universe I'm in, or even the macro universe of the metaverse, that I change and I basically do a state change into something else. And then eventually I become a tree. But I can do that autonomously because with Bitcoin, it's a ledger system. Is that all of these state changes is something that essentially we would be the new multiplayer game server that computes the state change from that seed to the tree, and essentially kind of remakes it based on these pre-written rules. And so I think this is the building blocks of how the metaverse is going to happen. And this is something that we're trying to pioneer while we're kind of putting out this game. And we have a lot of sophistication going into the game that is kind of you can't see right now. It's not just things happen and then we write it to chain. It's actually players have to possess certain turn tokens to make their move. Things have to be kind of in a trustless way with how our game operates. That I think is very unique with gameplay on chain. And so just to kind of go into our vision is really a decentralized, permissionless, and open metaverse protocol. My dream is to really innovate gaming to where all of us game developers can create things in this new network, right? Is that we have a very hard time if you don't have a lot of money, you're an indie. And if you're an indie, you have to go up against a lot of money. You have game discovery problems. You have obviously art budgets, and just making a game is extremely tough. The economic models of like pay, free to play, and now play and earn and all that are constantly evolving. But I think the trajectory that we're in is to be more open with the ecosystem, and instead of having these kind of walled gardens as before. I'm out of time. Thank you very much. Here is my contact information if you'd like to contact me.